Okay, well, I'm going to talk about the effect of environmental changes and environmental developments on the hotel industry, which I used to work in. And there are two I would pick on particularly. First is the sort of state of the world economy and the tourist industry in the world generally, which is very important because hotels are very sensitive to that. And that can change quite rapidly. So events can have a very major overnight impact and either positively or negatively for the industry. And you often can't see those things coming. So I remember, for example, around the turn of the 21st century, so early years of this century, every prediction would have been and was at the time that the tourist industry in the UK would continue to grow. It had been growing strongly for 20 or 30 years. And then very quickly, in rapid succession, various things happened which actually reversed that trend. So we had the attacks in New York, the 9/11 attacks, and for a little time after that people didn't want to fly, so you got a lot less visitors from overseas. We also had the foot and mouth disease outbreak that happened around that time, 2002 I think, where kind of huge swathes of the British countryside were closed off, and very, very bad news for the hotel industry. And then they had the launch of the euro, the currency, which when it first launched was very weak. The pound became very, very high in value, making it very expensive to come to the UK as an overseas destination. Overseas tourists didn't want to come to the UK. And that had a very negative effect. So those kind of things, those environmental developments that you can't always see coming, can have a very significant impact on an industry. The other one I would choose would be the state of the labour market. Because again, the hotel industry is very sensitive to that. So there are times when unemployment is high, relatively high, people are looking for work. It's not difficult to find people to fill the jobs you have in a hotel. In fact, people are queuing up asking for jobs. There is no problem finding the talent that you need. But then there are other times when unemployment is very low and there are skills shortages, there aren't enough people of the right quality and experience around, in which case you start having to do things like overseas recruitment drives. So I remember when I worked in hotels, we used to go to Ireland and we used to go to France to source the good quality experienced staff we needed. But there were other times we didn't need to do that at all because people were just knocking on the door asking for jobs.
I'm going to talk about environmental changes and the retail sector. And there are, I suppose, two trends in particular I'm going to talk about. The first one is changing customer expectations. So there's an ever-growing expectation from customers to get better service. And things like the global recession, people having less money in their pockets to spend, I think has only really heightened those expectations, because when they go to spend that, they want to make sure they have a really outstanding experience. So how does that impact the retail sector? Well, first of all, there's a push for increasing personalisation. So having a personalised product, having a personalised service experience. And that's also pushed organisations to use technology to help to create that really outstanding experience. So that could be customers ordering part of their meal on a separate kiosk within a restaurant environment. It could be how the online shopping element interfaces with the experience of when someone turns up at your front door and hands you a parcel. So from an HR point of view, I think HR need to understand technology a lot more than they did before, and also the business generally and business objectives. And there are also implications for things like training, so how frontline staff are trained to deliver that experience, but also to, I suppose, adapt to new initiatives which are introduced in a retail environment. And also potentially recruitment, and whether the profile of employee that organisations need in light of that is the same as it used to be, or whether it's different. Then the second trend I would see as impacting the retail sector, and it's one that's maybe a little bit further down the line still, is demographic change. So in a lot of places people are talking about a workforce cliff. As the workforce gets older and older, in several years there might not be the people with the skills that are required to do the jobs that the nation needs. So from an HR point of view, that could lead to different things. So I suppose first of all, from a manager's point of view, having to manage workforces or workplaces with a very, very diverse profile. So people with different ages, from different age groups. There might be a high reliance on migrant workers, so workplaces which are much more cross-cultural. It obviously creates challenges with recruitment and making sure that there's a talent pipeline, or there's a future plan for where employees are going to come from. And also possibly the need to be able to do more with less. So there's a role for HR in looking at business processes and productivity. So if there are fewer employees with the right skills, that can help to mitigate the negative impact of that.
I'd like to talk about the environmental impact on the National Health Service and focus on two areas: the political impact and also the impact of new drugs and new treatment technology. So looking first at the political impact, the NHS, as it's funded by central government through taxation, it's a very politically driven organisation, influenced very much by the politics of whichever party has the majority in the House of Commons at the time. So we will see changes in direction, changes in policy, changes in priority. For instance, the move to a 24/7 National Health Service, and some of the challenges that will present, for instance, the challenges by the junior doctors currently in order to fulfil the requirement of a 24/7 service. The other area is changes to new drugs and new treatment regimes. We're now able to treat and provide drug therapy for many, many conditions which previously we wouldn't have been able to. Research improves that and increases the range of conditions that we are able to treat, and the public has an expectation that we will be able to continue to do that. This also therefore then gives us some challenges around how we spend the money that is allocated to the health service, and leads us to positions where we're having to make some difficult choices about what we will treat and how we will treat.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about the environmental impacts on the agrochemical industry, which is an industry that I used to work in. This is a highly regulated environment because the organisations in this area are testing products to make sure that they're safe to be used by people before they're actually sold in the marketplace. So it's really important that the testing is done to a high standard. So there's quite a strong legal framework that governs the testing and the practices that surround it. This has implications for employees in these industries. So what it means, if I was working in a global agrochemical company, I would have to follow certain policies and procedures. I would also be audited on those to make sure that I was conducting them to the highest possible quality standards. This might mean for me as an employee that I couldn't necessarily exercise a lot of discretion in my working practices. It might mean that I couldn't really innovate very much. So for an HR person, a challenge is to make sure that people who have quite routine, standardised, highly regulated jobs fulfil those requirements, but at the same time do so in a way which provides them with some work satisfaction and potentially enables them to be engaged. So it can be looking at how you might try to reward people, recognise their contribution, and still enable them to have a voice.